Hello there, and welcome to Corey Loses for a video I've wanted to do for a while, the history of Thrawn's Revenge. So in this video, I'm going to talk about at least my perspective of the last 14 years of the mod. This includes all Empire War Expanded Project, Ascendancy, just basically everything the team has done since the mod started 14 years ago. The anniversary of the mod is generally we say the 7th. You could make an argument for the 6th, the 7th, or the 8th. We've usually gone for the 7th, but different stuff was happening at different points. So this is, again, all from my perspective. So there's going to be information that I'm lacking. There have been dozens of people working on the mod over the last 14 years, and I'm going to try to work in as much of that as I can. But especially with more recent stuff, there are so many of us that it's hard to get too deep into everything in a video like this. But tomorrow we're going to have a 12-hour long stream with myself and a bunch of other devs where they're going to be able to kind of give their own stories about the history of the mod and kind of what their experience with it has been. So hopefully that'll add a bit to what we're talking about today. And I'm probably going to cut up that stream and put up the individual sections as their own videos, because a 12-hour stream can be kind of daunting for people to get into. But the whole thing will still be up for people who want to watch it. So yeah, this is stuff that I have done a bit of research into. A lot of it is going to be from memory because some of the sources just aren't there anymore, but I've done some reading into chat logs, private messages with other devs, the dev server we have on Discord, Skype logs that Slorny has kept pretty meticulous logs for, or records of. News posts, I went through and I read as many news posts as I could. We don't have many before 2007. The mod started in 2006. And the original forums that the mod had on Envision Free, which is an old free forum hosting site, those got taken down, I think, just last year. So I'm not able to get some of that stuff, but I was able to kind of refresh my memory on a lot of what did happen, especially in those earlier years. But yeah, so I guess we'll get right into it. I'm going to kind of intersperse this with video from different releases, myself talking like this, and maybe some screenshots, I don't know. Whatever seems relevant at the time. But yeah, so my initial introduction to Empire at War came with a trailer that I believe was in the Star Wars Battlefront 2 extras disc, or extras on the disc. I used to think it was Revenge of the Sith, but I don't think that was the case. Evil Bob the Bob, I think, showed me the original trailer and said it was from Battlefront, and so that was a couple months before it was released. And at the time, we had a family computer. It was like Windows 98 or something. So I played a lot of Age of Empires too, but I saw that like I had just kind of recently gone into Star Wars in middle school. And so in end of 2005, beginning of 2006, I started Googling for Star Wars Empire at War, having seen this trailer. And that brought me to the sites for a couple other mods that existed at the time. Specifically, Legacy of War was the one that I got really into, but there were a bunch of others around before the game release. So Legacy of War, Imperial Assault, Project Mars was a non-Star Wars one. Ages of Star Wars was one that was a little bit newer than the other ones, but that covered the Jedi Civil War. There was another mod called Dawn of Victory, which was actually run by Mark from the Templin Institute, who I'm now good friends with, but I actually knew him at the time 14 years ago when he was running Dawn of Victory, and I was just starting Thrawn's Revenge, and we kind of got back in touch after both of us were starting to do YouTube stuff again, and I brought it up to him that we had both kind of come from that area and that we had actually met before. But yeah, so I was just kind of on the forums for Legacy of War especially, and they obviously couldn't make the mods directly yet, but there were a lot of them that were putting out what their plans were. A lot of them were making 3D assets, some texturing them, and I didn't really understand what a mod was. I didn't understand how it worked. So I was under the impression that when Empire at War came out, that all these mods would just release. So the release happened, And day of, I was like, okay, where's all these mods now? So I had no idea what I was talking about. And I started thinking, okay, well, if they're going to take this long to do what they're doing, I kind of want to get into this. And base game Empire at War didn't have Grand Admiral Thrawn. I had just finished reading the Thrawn trilogy recently, and I wanted Thrawn in as a hero. So I decided that I was going to try to do that. I was also trying to get in as like a beta tester for Legacy of War. I tested one of their mini mods by winning some sort of contest they had. It was a word scramble, I think, and they had scrambled the content that was going to be in the minimod. I think it was like 2 ships in a galactic conquest or something, and I figured it out, but they thought I cheated, so they were kind of annoyed at me. But I ended up testing the mod, and then eventually I did join that development team for a while. But I wanted to make Thrawn as a hero, so I started working on that. And there were some other people on the Legacy of War forums that were working on their own kind of mini mods like that. One named Ben was working on all the other Grand Admirals. There was... that was the main one that got involved with what I was doing, but a guy named Videotech DM'd me on the forums when Evil Jedi, who was a modder who worked on, or who made the Warlords mod for Homeworld 2. So Evil Jedi had free released all of his models for Empire at War modders to use. And Videotech had seen that and saw that I was going to be working on this mod to just add Thrawn. So he's like, hey, what do you think about putting all these models into the game? And I'm like, okay, I'll try to do that. I had, again, no idea how any of this would work. And I don't think the mod tools were even out at that point for like model importing and exporting. So that would have been like pretty soon after, and then the beta testing and all that was a little bit later. But yeah, so I agreed to what Tech was saying. This was early June now, so the game had been out for a few months. And we decided that, okay, we don't really know enough about Star Wars, so we need a third person to help us run this mod who is more just on the Star Wars lore side. So we contacted a guy named Zerteron, and then we moved to MSN, which was the hub of all contact in 2006. So between myself, Videotech, and Zer, this was now June 6th, 7th, 8th, that kind of period, we started talking about what we'd actually want to do, and it turned from just me putting in all these Warlords models to actually deciding, as one of the few mods that did this, that we were not going to use any Warlords models at all. We'd make everything in-house, and this is something that we've stuck with since. Despite the fact that at the time, none of the three of us knew what we were doing, didn't know how to make models, didn't know how to texture, didn't know how to code, really. I had a bit of XML experience from doing stuff like the Thrawn mod, and so we ultimately decided that, again, having no idea how any of this worked, that we would make a mod with the placeholder name of Thrawn's Revenge. We decided this. It was then time for dinner. So all three of us dispersed. And I'm in like grade 8 at this point, grade 7 or 8. So I was like, I think I would have been 14 then. Yeah, 14. So we came up with the name Thrawn's Revenge. This was the thing we spent the most time talking about. And we were like, okay, this is a placeholder. We're changing this tomorrow, but obviously we never did. But the other thing that we really decided on was that we were actually going to make Thrawn's Revenge be 3 different mods. So first off, we'd work on Thrawn's Revenge Empire of the Hand. This was our plan for a Galactic Civil War mod, so directly from the end of the Clone Wars up to the end of the the Battle of Endor. So this mod would have the Rebellion, the Empire, and the Empire of the Hand. It would the story of it would focus on Thrawn establishing the Empire of the Hand. And we kind of wanted a through line for all of them. Then we'd have, after that, a mod called Imperial Civil War, which would take place after Endor. And it would be all the warlords, that kind of period, leading up to the start of the Yuuzhan Vong War. And this was going to be structured kind of weirdly, where the first release we did would be the Empire, or the Imperial Remnant, the New Republic, and the Empire of the Hand. Then we'd release a second version that swapped out the Empire of the Hand for the Hapens. Then we do another version that swapped out the Empire of the Hand or the Hapens for the Siruvi. So at this point, we were thinking we'd only be able to do one extra playable faction, which is something we obviously moved away from as we learned. But third up would be a Clone Wars mod called Fall of the Republic. So this would primarily focus on the Clone Wars, but it would also have the Chiss Ascendancy in, based on stuff from Outbound Flight. And so between the three, we'd kind of cover this whole, the whole saga period of Star Wars as it was. And we kind of internally referred to them as Release 1, Release 2, and Release 3. So R1, R2, R3. And that was kind of how they were always referred to. So R1 being Empire of the Hand, the Galactic Civil War mod. R2 being Imperial Civil War. And R3 being Fall of the Republic. And this is obviously a ton of work. We had no clue what we were really getting into. But we did okay with recruiting other people to kind of be in on the mod. We had Code User from Ages of Star Wars join up. And he's been one of the people who's been with the mod since the start. He's still around. Obviously, real life in our late 20s is a lot more busy. So he'll chip in stuff once in a while. But we got really close over the course of the last 14 years. And I went and joined Ages of Star Wars as well. So I was involved with that mod, which is where some of the Revan's Revenge assets come from. Because a lot of us from TR end up joining that mod or vice versa. So there was a lot of overlap. Code User, Wildcat, Kalo worked on both. Especially after Ages of Star Wars died and got revived. But we ended up growing the mod pretty easily. We had Ben, who I mentioned earlier, that was working on the Grand Admiral's mod. We pulled him in, a guy named Red Commodore. We pulled him in, so both of those were working on coding. Red Commodore and myself started learning how to 3D model. Code User already knew how to 3D model, knew how to texture. Not great by today's standards, but he was always one of the most skilled graphic artists in the community, entirely self-taught. So he was responsible for a lot of the 3D art, a lot of the texturing. All of my texturing, up until very recently, was mostly just trying to recreate Code User's style slightly worse until Substance Painter came along. And he's also the one who did the FX mod, which was a creation of himself and a couple other TR members that just re-released our our explosions, our projectiles as their own kind of standalone mod. And as much as right now our FX have kind of trailed behind some of the community, the ones you see in most mods right now are actually built off of our old projectiles, and you can see which ones use modified versions of our projectiles by going into their files and searching for Blarg, BLARG. Because Code User, as talented as he is, was really bad at that point at file organization. So between him and Enceladus, who was a mapper for a long time, we just had, and I was not great at it either, but there'd just be things called Splody, Blarg, just random character strings that a lot of them are actually still there, and it drives Bob especially crazy. Evil Bob the Bob, who's one of our people like me who does pretty much a bit of everything, but he's primarily doing AI and does a lot of texturing and models. And he runs Phoenix Rising as well, another great mod that people should check out. But yeah, so a lot of the disorganization comes back from myself, Code User, and Enceladus, and a bit of Kalo being just god-awful at naming things. But yeah, so that was something that we worked on pretty early. We had a lot of other people end up joining. Our biggest thing was usually more how people got along in the team. So if we could teach someone, great. If they were already talented, great. But the thing we were really looking for was a lack of friction, and that's something that I think we've been really good at overall. There was one exception to this early on, is that Turon would often butt heads with people, and Uh, like not always, but that was the one source of some arguments within the team. And I kind of saw it as necessary for me to have Zur and Videotech as co-leaders, so people who together would be able to like outvote me if other people didn't want to speak out. So, because I always felt that I would make decisions that seem like fun, but would obviously be a lot of work. And especially when my decisions would be impacting the work other people have, then I didn't want to be responsible for that. Or if my ideas were bad, I needed people who would be able to tell me no. And I saw Zur as kind of filling that role for a long time. Uh, so he and I would get into a lot of discussions, and he and I didn't have much like direct headbutting. Like we disagree, but it didn't really get heated between the two of us that often. Uh, but that was the only real source of discontent within the team for a long time. Like we've gone 14 years, and I've very rarely had to either kick or remove people from the team, and we very rarely had people outright quit. It's only happened maybe uh, three people that out of like probably 100 at this point who have left with any sort of bad blood. Uh, most of which have two of the three of which have like reconciled or had reconciled and came back, or didn't come back but had reconciled, which is a pretty low amount for that many people over 14 years. We have a staff Discord server that has most of the most of the modders, yeah, from the history of the team that are still in there, at least as of the point that Discord was a thing. So since like 2016, 2017, when we created that, the staff server, and there's something like 54 members. Because like we don't really have a hard dividing line of like what people need to do to stay an active dev. It's just people contribute what they can when they can, and then like we have a role for inactive members just so that they're not like directly accounted as people we'd expect to do stuff if we're trying to make plans, just so I have a better idea of what and who I should plan around. But that's, I think there are two things that I think have really contributed to our ability to be successful over the last 14 years, and one is that team atmosphere, which gets harder to maintain the more people you have, because you have a lot more competing ideas of what people want to do. But I think one of the things that I have been good at uh, is kind of figuring out what's important to different people, where certain areas matter for people, and trying to keep it clear that it is like this is a thing we're doing together for fun, and trying to understand like what people's motivations are for it. So I think that is an important factor. And the other one is that we're very willing to criticize our own work. Uh, it's very rare that we'll finish something and be like, okay, this is never going to have to be redone again. And I think more recently we've kind of gotten more confident in certain things, just that not that they're perfect, but that they're probably the last time we're going to redo that thing. But but I think being open to that kind of criticism and bringing it up yourselves first, and kind of knowing the limitations of what you're doing is very important. Uh, and it also contributes to a willingness to kind of release and iterate. You can see a lot of mods that spend over a decade not releasing anything, because they've got some idea of like, oh, when we release it, it's got to be perfect. But as far as I've like, my belief has always been when you get the first pass on something, once you get the first release of something out, and we kind of forced ourselves into this initially, which we'll get to in a minute. But when you get the first thing out, every improvement you make on that is better than what people are already playing. And there's some limits within that where like you don't want to put something out every day because that'll break saves, it'll be too much for people to keep up with. So there has to be like some kind of reasonable basis for it. But if you get something out, you'll get feedback on it faster, you'll get an idea of what the limitations are faster, and you're less likely to pile stuff onto a broken system that you then have to fundamentally rebuild. And we've done a lot of fundamental rebuilding, but it's usually, I think, been in the direction of improving things. And there have been places where like we'll make a change that's experimental, it's a step back for the mod. But the other thing with getting releases out faster is that you're able to fix those things quicker. So it's not people playing with a broken thing for 2 months if something is, or for 2 years. If something is broken, maybe it's a couple months. but you're usually able to get on top of that sooner. But yeah, so early on, we spent the time between like 2006 and 2009 plugging away on these 3 mods. Fall of the Republic got a lot of asset work. Uh, Empire of the Hand got a good amount of asset work. Imperial Civil War actually got the least attention out of anything. So we released 4 mini mods between 2006 and 2010. 2 were from the Galactic Civil War period, which we absolutely hated and have been. Any trace of them has been pretty much deleted from the internet, although I think Slorny probably still does have them. And we had 2 Fall of the Republic mini mods, which we generally thought were much better. And they were just like adding units to. Both of them were just adding units to base Empire at War / Forces of Corruption. But yeah, so we kind of plugged away on those for a while, but because there were more of us than the average mod team, but fewer of us than what was effectively 3 mods needed, there was a lot of feeling like we were spinning our wheels. And especially at that point, there was a lot of feeling that mods should just be piling in units. There was a mod called Galaxy Divided that kind of just did what Videotech and I were initially talking about and just put out every poorly rigged Warlords model they could, which kind of took attention away from some of the larger mods like Legacy of War, Imperial Assault, and kind of reduced their ability to get help from people because people were like, oh, well, this other stuff is out and your stuff isn't out, so your stuff is obviously worse. And that's kind of mirroring what my attitude was before I started the mod. But yeah, so that was difficult to navigate, trying to figure out what was possible in the game engine, what we wanted to do in the game engine. Are we just piling in these factions and galactic conquests? Videotech actually left pretty soon after the mod started. So it was myself as team leader, Zerteron as co-leader, and because Tech was going off to college, he was a bit older than us, and he decided that when he was done with that, he was just going to leave the team. And it was kind of weird because that was like 3 months in. So like that kind of just shows what our expectations were on how fast we would work, where we kind of thought within like a year we'd have a version of all these things out. And there wasn't any real plan around like, okay, are we doing this and then it's done? How are we going to be supporting them afterwards? Because again, we had no idea what any of it actually entailed. So we thought like, okay, it's done, it's out, and then that's it. But over the course of the next few years, while we were making all this stuff, we had a lot of issues with maintaining focus. So we got to around 2009, and a lot of our interest had just completely waned because like we weren't getting releases done, and this kind of influenced what I was talking about a couple minutes ago with how we started to see the utility of releases. But yeah, so early to mid 2009, I think I put out a news post in June or July, and yeah, I think it was the June update 2009 actually. And we were, even in the news post, you could tell that I was kind of just sick of it. We had a few people that had left because for a lot of us who were around the same age, we were a year away from finishing high school, going into university, and we'd spent 3 years of our lives on this project at that point. For some of us, like code user, myself, Slorny, Kalo was 2 years, and Celadus was 2 years. And we kind of didn't really see where it was going. We didn't really have interest in playing Empire at War anymore. Most of us hadn't played it other than to directly test the stuff we were doing in years. And so in the news post, I'm like, yeah, there's a bunch of us have left. We're still getting some stuff done. We finished the Fall of the Republic mini mod version 2 shortly after that, I think. But it was clear that the mod was kind of on its way out. And by like December that year, 2009, we had decided that we were done. So we all quit. We all went on with our lives. And then so the summer of 2010, was the summer before I went off to university. So I started thinking, like, we had put all this time into this mod. Nothing was ever really released. The mini mods we didn't really count. So I started emailing the rest of the dev team and being like, hey, I'm taking what we did. I'm going to do whatever I can to it over the course of the summer, and I'm going to just release it. So if any of you want to get in on this, then short-term commitment, it's something we'll do for fun over the summer, and we'll release whatever's done end of August. And then I'm going off to university. I'm never touching this again. So that's what we did. Sorry, I'm just putting my phone out of my pocket because it's way too hard in here, or way too hot in here. But I realize that doesn't sound like it's connected, but warm phone against your side, not great. But yeah, so everyone was back on board. The entire team came back except for one or two people who kind of filtered back in over the summer. And we decided that we're done with Fall of the Republic. We're done with Empire of the Hand, which was kind of a decision we'd made earlier where we were just going to move to Imperial Civil War, because we figured, like, everyone's doing a Galactic Civil War mod. The Imperial Civil War period lets us focus on just one of those things, or focus on like a different area than everything, gives us more options with factions. There's very little that Empire of the Hand would have that Imperial Civil War wouldn't have. So we had decided on that, and we kind of realized that part of the reason that we'd fallen off as hard as we had was that we were focusing on too many things at once. At one point, we had even decided to launch a Yuuzhan Vong War mod. We never really announced anything with that. It was kind of something that we'd been working on behind the scenes. But I still have some assets. Like, I have my mods source folder, my modding kind of source folder with a lot of the assets from around this time, and it's organized into 4 folders: R1, R2, R3, and R4. R4 being the Yuuzhan Vong War that was never named. But yeah, so we decided we'd just do what we could with Imperial Civil War over the summer, and we'd release that. And we actually got a fair amount done in the course of 2 or 3 months. So that was what 1.0 ended up being. We released it at the end of the month, or at the end of the summer. We still thought, okay, this is it. We're done. We're good. And I think it was a voice call in the Skype chat. I think it was me and Kalo, or it might even have been text. But this is one of the areas where we don't actually have the Skype logs. We have a few months missing, and it includes the day of release for 1.0. And I don't think Slorny had, like, Slorny and I were looking through his stuff. Slorny kept a lot of this stuff, and I was lazy and didn't keep any of it. But I was saying, like, yeah, have we done something that we can be proud of here? And Kayla was like, no, shut the fuck up. This is terrible. So we were all kind of on the same page with that we didn't like 1.0. None of us had really played much Empire at War still. It was all just about working on it. And that's actually something that kind of kept up for a long time. And we'll get into how that changed in a bit. But we had decided that, yeah, this isn't great. We're going to make a few changes. We'll do one more release, and then we're done. Because we're going to university. We're not going to have time. But when I got to university, I found I had a lot more free time than I ever had before. So I ended up working more on the mod. And then when I was active, that would usually mean other people started being more active around that time. Where still, like, a lot of the reason for us wanting to work on the mod was just that we liked working with each other. So we just kept kind of doing what we wanted to do. We were working on getting 1.1 out, which we finished the beta for around Christmas. And so it was a lot of fixing stuff up, a few new pieces of content. But after we got into beta, something personal came up for me where my sister's fiance, they had gone on vacation a little bit before we had restarted the mod. And while they were on vacation, he was hospitalized with something the doctors weren't able to identify. So my sister had stayed with him in Mexico, where they were on vacation, and they got transferred to the United States in Florida, where they were for a while. And if his family hadn't had insurance, because we're Canadian, then he would have had a lot of issues with that. And we were having trouble getting him back into Canada. But eventually he did get back into Canada, and the doctors were still unsure of what it was. This is still by like September. By December, he was in and out of hospitals even more often. And it was something that like my mom was flying back and forth to Florida while my sister and her fiance were down there. It was even like making the news, the issues we were having getting him home. And unfortunately, in January, he died from we still didn't know what. And so just it was such a long process, and watching him go through that, it kind of like that kind of ate up everything. So even though we were in beta, I decided like I wasn't really in a headspace to work on the mod, and that was like the first time that I lost anyone that was really close to me. So it was watching my sister go through that, especially, and his family. But yeah, so we didn't release 1.1. There were a few people that were just like complete dicks about it. Where it's like, oh, you promised us this thing, and I explained generally what was going on with it. I didn't go into much detail, but we ended up skipping 1.1. A few months later, we ended up putting out 1.2, and then this gets us in, like, at this point we're in like 2011, so it was January 2011 where he died, and we were around the point where we were getting a release ready every 6 months, so we got quickly into 1.3, and we started learning more about factions. This is when we started having like the minor factions become a thing. We started having more playable factions, because initially it was just the Empire, the New Republic, and the Empire of the Hand, but the next playable faction we did was the Pentastar Alignment. Duskin League came after that, and we started really kind of getting into a groove with what we wanted to do. Between 2010, that release of 1.0 in 2010, and the release of 2.1 towards the end of 2014. So there's not a huge amount to talk about over that period of time with respect to Thrawn's Revenge, but we were still falling into the same kind of pattern where we weren't playing the mod very much. Our interest was kind of flagging. We were starting to lose direction. Like, we were getting a lot done, but we didn't have the best idea of how it all worked in game. We had some like fundamental ideas of what we wanted it to look like, and some ideas of how we wanted it to work, but our interest in Empire at War was once again kind of waning. And 2012, we had all started getting into Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion. And so this is a game that we had wanted to mod. We started wanting to mod, and we started coming up with ideas for our own kind of universe, step away from Star Wars, no more triangles for us. And we started coming up with ideas for a mod called Ascension, which was going to be, again, our own universe, no Star Wars, make up all our own factions and stuff. But ultimately we started thinking, like, the more we were playing it, like, wouldn't it be cool if we could have like our Empire of the Hand stuff in this game? Or wouldn't it be cool if we could play as the Empire in this game? And there were some other Sins mods that were Star Wars, but especially with the Empire of the Hand, that was something that a couple of us, especially myself and Kalo, really wanted to see. So in 2012, with I think the release of 2.1, with the manual, we put in a teaser for a new mod. It was just the X-Wing render for Sins of a Solar Empire for Star Wars Ascendancy, which became our Sins mod. And this kind of was the thing we were focused on for 2012 to 2014. There were some people who were pretty angry at us for having started that when Thrawn's Revenge wasn't finished. But you never really finish a mod. You can always, like, there's no set release date you have to meet. There's no set content you have to fill out. It's really just whatever you want to add is what you add. And so the scope that we had was always whatever we determined. And it was actually Ascendancy starting that kept Thrawn's Revenge going for arguably both 2.0 and 2.1. Because a lot of that was just model editions, and our interest was primarily in working on Ascendancy. So by making those things for Ascendancy, we would backport them into Thrawn's Revenge, and that kind of kept Thrawn's Revenge alive. Those were the models that we were adding. That was the work we were doing. And after 2.1, that was when we started graduating university. And this kind of had the effect that we thought graduating high school would have and going to university, where just coming out of university, we had just released the first bits of Ascendancy, the first bits of, or the last bits of Thrawn's Revenge, so 2.1. And we'd started talking about what we wanted to do for 2.2. So 2.2 for Thrawn's Revenge was supposed to be, for Imperial Civil War rather, was supposed to go back in time and add the Galactic Civil War stuff just as a single Galactic Conquest. And that was about what we thought we'd be working on in 2015. We were still kind of churning out content for Ascendancy, but even that was kind of slowing down. And that's when I started working at McDonald's. I was trying to find a different, better job, but I just got like so tired working at McDonald's that I started falling off of modding. And when I fell off, other people started falling off. So some other bugs started coming up in Thrawn's Revenge, which I spent a lot of time trying to fix, and being unable to fix them kind of took up all my modding time and kind of took up my desire to mod. So it was like a year where very little got done. And ultimately we decided that the focus on the Galactic Civil War was a bad idea for Thrawn's Revenge. If we ever wanted to do that, it would have to be a different mod. And at that point, like, doing a different mod was just not in the cards. In 2015, though, that's when I started doing kind of like recreational streaming and videos, and I started doing like bits of playthroughs for Thrawn's Revenge and Ascendancy especially, to kind of do previews. This is where kind of Corey Loses came from. Initially I was doing it on the Thrawn's Revenge channel, but then I started doing it on, then I created this channel in 2015, mostly just a way to like get away from my McDonald's hell. But then the next year, 2016, I got a job at StatsCan. I got a temporary contract doing the census, so I was able to quit McDonald's, and I put in my notice in January that I was quitting in April. So that made me feel a lot better. So even though I was still working there for about 4 months, I started kind of picking up mod work a little bit more, and we kind of reshaped the focus of the mod from Galactic Civil War to what it became, the Warlords. This is the release. 2.2 is kind of where the mod got a lot of its structure, where we started adding the Warlords as playable factions. That's where Ariadu, Zinj, and the Greater Maldrud came in as playable factions. That's where the last major planetary and galactic reworks came from, which is something we're working on with the next releases. But it's when the mod started feeling like what it does now. Like, I'd say as much as we have changed with 2.3, which is kind of overhauled everything, if you play 2.2, the mod is still recognizable. If you go back and play like 1.3 or earlier, then it feels entirely different. And there's an extent to which that's still true. Even if you go from 2.3.6 back to 2.3, then we've changed more than pretty much any other release in the past. But with 2.2, you can get a feeling of where we're going to be going with it. And that was the first release that we did that I actually enjoyed playing. And that's really the first release that we did that I did play a lot. Because in 2016, I just finished the contract at the end of summer. So I was still working on the mod up till then, and we started picking up even more staff at that point. That is when, with 2.2, September 2016, I started doing daily uploads on the channel, and I was doing consistent playthroughs. So we decided that we'd work on the 2.2 demo, which really put into practice what I had learned, or what I had talked about earlier about us learning with the with the 1.0 release, that if you get something out, it really focuses what you're working on. You get an idea of what you're going for, where you need to improve, and it's better to have that out than not. And we kind of realized that with the 4-year gap between 2.1 and 2.2, we were kind of flagging the same way that we had, or really 3-year. But we decided we'd do the Hunt for Zinj demo. We tested out a lot with that. We got a lot of the mechanics we wanted with that. We got a lot of the art updates we wanted with that. And I started doing the preview playthroughs. That's when Corey Loses began the daily channel. And the mod really started to take shape. And we started recruiting people who had been doing sub mods, like 2.1, because it was out for so long. Started gathering a few community release sub mods. Then 2.2 got a few as well. Jordan Carmer, who is a current dev, he got his start as a person who made a sub mod. The sub mod kind of fleshed out the CSA and made them a faction, a playable faction. And a lot of his work is what went into making the CSA a playable faction in later releases of the official mod. We picked up, I started talking to Evil Bob the Bob. We'd always had a policy of kind of staying disengaged from the rest of the modding community, because there were a lot of people that we just didn't enjoy talking to, and we thought it was we're into modding because we want to make the mods that we make. We want to have fun, and to us, interacting with a lot of the other Empire at War modders just frankly was not fun. But when I started talking to Evil Bob the Bob, we got along really well, and we kind of pulled him into the dev server, not as an active dev, but just he kept calling it a consultant position. But then we'd start talking about other stuff around him, and he'd start chipping into conversations, and then he started chipping in models or seeing that something needed to be done. So he started actively fully rewriting our AI, and he was saying, okay, I'm just going to do this. But then he kind of got pulled in more and more, and we pulled in a few other people like that. This is when we really started growing the team. Way Lawful came in and started doing sound stuff. He did leave because he kind of fell off on Star Wars, and now Honest is in here. This is kind of a compressed time schedule now over the last 2 years, but we pulled in a lot of our testers started learning how to do different parts of modding, like Mr. Puerto Rican started learning how to do modeling and texturing. Nohembre from his own sub mod for Republic at War joined recently. Valerie, who is someone who actually worked on earlier iterations of Thrawn's Revenge. She was around in 2007 under the name Valen. She was actually working for Legacy of War, but she was also kind of on our team. She did the Chaff concept art back then, and then I'm not sure if it's 2 or 3 years ago now, she popped back up in the Discord, and I was like, yeah, if you're still looking to do concepts, this is something we really need. And she's done a lot of Hapen concepts, some Empire of the Hand concepts, the Strident concept, pulled in people like Aceritzel, Inertial, Terrible. Mr. Hobo is a former coder who came back. So I'm not going to be able to name everyone, but we've pulled a lot of former devs came back, a lot of new people kind of got interest or found it through the videos and started joining the team. And I think Inertial came in through me just saying in a video offhand, if you're a 3D artist, we really need 3D artists. So this is kind of jumping ahead a bit, but in 2017, for April Fools, I had started getting the idea that I wanted to do Fall of the Republic again, now that we had a lot of those people had started joining. And this was still a little bit before we'd moved primarily to Discord, so Bob wasn't around, a lot of the people I just mentioned weren't quite around, but our team was kind of in the groove. I had started doing modding full-time, and there are some personal reasons for, or not modding full-time, but the channel full-time. So I had started wanting to do Fall of the Republic for a while, because I'd been playing Clone Wars mods and nothing really matched what I wanted out of a Clone Wars mod, and I was kind of looking for Thrawn's Revenge, but Clone Wars. And in 2015, the end of 2015, my mom had been diagnosed with cancer. So throughout 2016, she was in treatment, and we thought she was going to be fine. So I was still in Ottawa, which is where I live. But the end of 2016, she had finished her initial treatment, but she was still feeling really shitty. So she started going for other tests. And in early January 2017, she was diagnosed as terminal. So at that point, I decided I was just going to stick with working on my channel full time because it was getting some growth. I was finally making a little bit of money, nowhere near enough to live off of, but between Patreon and ad revenue, and my own savings, because I had been saving up to go back to school at some point, I was able to go and live with my parents. I was still paying full rent for my apartment in Ottawa, which was expensive, actually. But I was able to stay with my parents, which allowed my dad to go to work, so I would stay home with my mom, which gave me a lot of time for modding. And I kind of didn't really plan more than a couple weeks or months ahead at any given time because I didn't know what my mom's situation was. Like when I went initially, we thought she didn't have more than a couple weeks to live. So I ended up being there for a year and a half. But with all that extra time to mod, with all the extra team we had, early 2017, I had decided that I wanted to work on Fall of the Republic again. So I told everyone in the team, like, this is a thing that I'm going to do as well as I can with the assets we have. I'll make some extra ones. Is anyone else on board? And everyone was universally on board. So that started reviving. We did the April Fool's video, which was the Fall of the Republic trailer. And it was a couple months later, or I think it was just 1 month later. I think it was May, where we put out the final thing revealing that it wasn't just an April Fool's joke. It was actually a mod we were making. And it did take us the 3 extra years to get here because it was just early 2020 when we actually released Fall of the Republic. But yeah, that was kind of how that started and how the whole April Fool's joke for announcing actual mods came about. We had done some earlier April Fool's jokes that were kind of more clearly April Fool's jokes, and we kind of hinted at some Vong stuff. But yeah, we were kind of getting into a groove where we were putting out content that we were confident in. I was able to kind of justify spending more time on modding ever since the end of 2016 because it gave me stuff to play on the channel, and people seemed to like the preview playthroughs. All the team seemed to support them. Like before I started, it was something that I actually directly talked to the team about, and something that I try very hard to make sure they're all okay with what I do. Where it was like a lot of I'm not directly monetizing the mod personally, but I knew that doing preview playthroughs, I was kind of going to be the main place people got their news about the mod, and especially because the videos were my job, I wanted to make sure none of them felt like I was taking advantage of their work, but they were all on board, and it is something that I try to be careful about, because I don't want them to feel like I'm just taking advantage of their work, and where possible, I try to support or try to make sure we use the mod resources to support signal boosting other people on the team who want to do stuff. But yeah, so we started growing the team a lot with all those people I just mentioned, a lot of other people who have joined more recently as well, and we put out 2.2, which did really well. We put out 2.3 last year. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with history for the last 2 years because it's been pretty obvious. Like a lot of people have been around. It's a lot more well documented. But yeah, with a lot of what we've done over the last 2 years, this is something that I covered in the Revan's Revenge video a couple days ago. It's kind of been making sure the mod is as easy to develop as possible. So not only do we have more people doing more stuff, we also have the better tools in place to do it, like Substance Painter, which isn't a thing we made, obviously, but it's a thing that made texturing a lot easier, a lot more fun. Like I love texturing now with Substance Painter, whereas before drawing it directly on Photoshop was kind of annoying. But the way the files are organized in the mod, we're able to work on Thrawn's Revenge and Fall of the Republic all at once, and Revan's Revenge now as well, where it feels like we have all the pieces in place to kind of do what we want to do, and we can do it pretty well. But yeah, that's kind of how we got to where we are today, and it's been 14 years of uh, working with this team, which I just want to thank them for making this as fun as it's been for me over the last 14 years, and I hope that all of you guys on the team have enjoyed it as much as I have, whether you've been there since the beginning, which a lot of you have, or joined more recently. I think we've been able to get together a really good group that we all like working with each other. Even if there's disagreements, they're usually handled in a way where like we all understand where we're coming from, avoiding like actual conflict, and keeping an atmosphere that we're all kind of on the same page, even if we're not like specifically on the same page on content. But I also hope that you guys watching have enjoyed the mod over the last 14 years, even at times that we didn't. And we have a lot of options for where we can go in the future, which is really exciting, both in terms of stuff we make for Empire at War, or if we wanted to apply our assets elsewhere, mod-wise, or even the possibility of developing our own game with some of us. Even people who have worked like tangentially just through Thrawn's Revenge. I started working with like Ek and Charlie, which I doubt would have happened if I hadn't done Thrawn's Revenge and gotten into the channel. Gull and Bane before them. So like who I am as a person is almost entirely formed by the work I've done on this mod. It's been part of my life for over half of my life now, or I guess for just under half of my life now. Next year it will have been over half of my life, or in a couple months. So like the skills I have, like I never would have seen myself being a professional YouTuber or like anything like this if I hadn't gone through and gotten the skills that I had from Thrawn's Revenge. So I have no intention of quitting anytime soon. But yeah, it's been a hell of 14 years. So thanks for watching, guys. Reminder, we have the stream tomorrow where we're going to be talking about everything that's happened with some viewpoints that aren't just my own, some input from people that I've mentioned in this video, and some that I unfortunately didn't. Again, trying to do such a broad overview of 14 years, it's hard to mention everyone. But yeah, so thanks for watching, and have a good one.